Moin, moin, liebe monkeys, and welcome to the first English interview on this podcast. So, if you're a little bit surprised right now, who am I talking with and why I'm doing that in English, you should listen up because I have a very special guest for you right now. You know that I love squats and I love that people are doing things right, the right technique, the right mindset when it comes to training. And so I have here a really great guest. And I have Aaron from the Squat University right now. He's the author of the Squat Bible. And I got the tip from some of my monkey gang, as I will call them, that I will let the guest introduce himself because maybe there's a little bit more connection to that. So yeah, Aaron, great that you're here on the podcast, and thanks for being here. Yeah, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
A little bit to your background story, or as we will call the origin story, the hero's journey, where you came from, maybe just from the educational standpoint and from a sports perspective, and why you are doing what you're doing right now.
Definitely. So my background is in all sports, really. You know, I grew up in middle school and high school playing all sports, basketball, football, soccer. And then as I got into college, I transitioned and started learning about weightlifting. I actually started competing in weightlifting in 2005. I went to a very small school in northeastern Missouri here in the United States called Truman State University. And we had a small weightlifting team, and that's where I first was introduced to the competition side of, you know, the clean and jerk and snatch. And I had always done a lot of barbell training for just, you know, staying in shape and training and competing for football before, but I had never really competed in weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting. So I found it and just fell in love with it. Education background wise, I was in a major to learn exercise science. So it really came with the background of strength and conditioning and learning from the fitness, the science part of things. And then after my undergrad degree of 4 years, I went to the University of Missouri, a couple hours south, a much bigger school, to get my doctorate in physical therapy, or physiotherapy as it's called everywhere else. And since then yes, exactly. I don't know why that the U.S. is the only place that calls it physical therapy. You know, the entire world calls it physiotherapy, but
because they're special, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's very true. Yeah, like a lot of things, the U.S. likes to, you know, claim it as its own. After I graduated with my doctorate, I then moved to Kansas City, and I've been working at a clinic called Boost Physical Therapy and Sports Performance ever since, where I blend my background in weightlifting with physical therapy and physiotherapy and try to help athletes of all ages, fix their aches and pains and return to the sports they love. I see athletes as young as, 8 years old, soccer, football, basketball, and then also all the way up to your CrossFitter, your weightlifter, powerlifters, and then, your weekend warriors, people who are 80 years old and still trying to, stay strong and fit. So I see a wide variety of people. But again, my background is in weightlifting, and I still train weightlifting, even though I haven't competed in about 2 years now. Life gets busy sometimes, so we change our priorities. But I still train, 6-7 days a week in weightlifting, and I love every minute of it. Awesome. And one of the big things I noticed when I was really starting to practice as a physical therapist years ago is that during the evaluation of an athlete that was injured, there's a time where I would want to just see how were they moving. I wanted to find out why they were, having this aches and pains, whether it was a knee pain, a hip pain, back pain. I just want to see, how are you moving? So I'd watch them do a number of different things, bend over, touch your toes, perform a squat, walk for me. And the one thing I noticed across the board was that athletes had an issue with performing a basic bodyweight squat. Even athletes who were extremely strong, even athletes that were very good weightlifters or powerlifters who squatted heavy a lot, could not perform a perfect squat when I told them to get out of their shoes and squat to full depth. There was always something that was a little wrong. And then also the single leg version of the squat, which a lot of people, unless you're a CrossFitter, you don't really train pistol squats a lot. So, I'd always ask them, do a single leg squat, because the squat is also a single leg movement rather than, only a double leg. And I found time and time again, athletes could not perform just basic movement. And if we think about it, I think a big reason is we've sort of rearranged our athletic priorities to think that the squat is only an exercise, or it's an exercise first. And really, it's movement first and then exercise. And when you don't move well, if you have an inability just to perform a bodyweight squat with good technique, it's sort of like building a house on a faulty foundation, building a house on a sandy beach. It can look good for a while, but the next time a storm comes through or the tide rolls in, that house is going to crumble. And that's what happens to our bodies, basically, when you have an athlete that can't move very well, but yet is trying to lift a lot of weight. They're in a program where their coach is telling them to go up in weight, to do snatches, clean and jerks, squats, whatever they're trying to do, and they can't move well first. It's just spelling a disaster, an eventual recipe for injury down the road. So my goal with Squat University was to come at it with the perspective of, let me teach you how to move well first. Let's find out how to screen your body, because I feel like there's sort of this disconnect between the medical community and the athletic community, because the medical community would talk down to people. And they'd use big words like, you're
based.
Exactly. Right. And you get a lot of these people
all to the anatomy and so on. And
exactly. So they'll use anatomy terms, but they won't explain it well. They'll be like, well, your supraspinatus is going to internally rotate at the flexion angle of this. And they just tune out. They're like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah, right.
But if I can tell you and take those same terms in those same ideas, but I can explain it to you and teach you in a way that you can understand, it's going to empower you to have that much more control of your body and understand your body. And then you're going to be able to fix your body. And then you won't have to go to a doctor. You won't have to go to a physio, because you're going to be able to take that knowledge and fix yourself. So that's really what a lot of the content started out as. It was 3 years ago in October, I started, just putting out a lot of content and giving away all my information for free. My big thing is I'm here to try to help everyone. I'm not trying to make all the money from trying to sell you a $19.99 course to buy every single day and only giving away little snippets of what I know. I want to be able to give away as much content as possible, so that in the end, everyone can win and everyone can be empowered to fix their movement. So that's sort of where it's gone. And now it's continued to evolve. And I talk a lot about injuries now, and but still with the same basis. We need to move well first, and then let's load up the bar and lift some big weights and have fun with it.
Yeah, that's awesome said, and really nice introduction right there, because you mentioned so many good stuff that is also very important to me, and I can relate as well as due to your mindset, the mindset you talked about, move well first, then move often and move heavy, because I always say in my Insta story, being able to move under load is one of the healthiest thing you can do, but the technique has to be the first thing. You have to really get a proper amount of. So, like you said, the squat is not squatting heavy or squatting under a bar. It could also be a resting position, and
yes,
either with the athletes I work with, or the normal people I work with, that they squat heavy, but they cannot sit in a squat for more than 5 minutes. I am sitting here right now for a quarter of an hour in the squat, and that should be a normal thing. So you mentioning that the squat is more than the exercise itself is so important to understand. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that topic. How could someone that has a bit of shitty squat or squat technique, what should they focus on first to fix that?
Definitely. I mean, the first thing you need to do is you need to be able to screen your body and find out why you have such bad technique, and this is stuff I've outlined in a number of different posts on social media. One of the biggest things I find is the ankle mobility is a huge limiter for people. A lot of times we don't understand. We think a lot of hips, we think a lot of maybe your back, but ankle mobility is huge. There's a simple test I use. It's called the 5-inch wall test. Not something I came up with, something I've just learned from others. You just go to a wall. Now, 5 inches, I'd have to get out a measuring tool to find out exactly how many centimeters it is. But you're going to put your foot almost a fist and an extended thumb away from that wall. That's around the same type. And put your foot up to that part of your palm and see, can you, by kneeling by the wall, touch your knee to the wall without your heel popping up? And that's just a general recommendation. It's a very, gross screen to see if you have enough ankle mobility. And a lot of people, they don't know that they have limitations there. It's almost like a way of uncovering the invisible restrictions that you don't see. And if you have a limitation, that's going to mean that other parts of your body are going to have to move excessively in order for you to get down that deep. So you're going to have a lot of butt wink. Your butt's going to be pulled under your body. Your hips are going to feel really stiff, all because of your ankles.
Yeah.
So doing different things like,
Oh, Aaron,
Good.
I think it gets broken.
I think we stuck for a second.
Yeah, right. Could you repeat that again? That sentence.
There we go. We're good.
So,
Yeah, so I'm gonna do some mobility exercises. Like, can you get me?
Yes. No.
Okay, cool. Okay. If you have a limitation there, doing some mobility exercises like some foam rolling or some stretching is great to help improve that mobility. Then you need to use that mobility. So like you said, you then need to sit down in the bottom of the deep squat and express that full motion. And then, a lot of times people, like you said, they have a difficult time sitting for a long time. So then you use a graded progression. So the first day, you do 5 sets of 30 seconds of just sitting down there in the bottom. And at first that's going to feel like a pretty tough stretch. And then, the next day you do it again. And then the next day you maybe do 40 seconds. And then you just work yourself up to eventually you're doing 3 sets of a minute. And then eventually you're doing longer. And, as time goes on, you should feel more comfortable in expressing that full motion. Because if you look a lot at these, we would call them, I guess, third world, countries that don't use a lot of chairs when they rest, they sit down in the deep squat as a resting position like you're doing right now all the time. And it's because their bodies have become used to moving and using that motion and just sitting there like that.
Yeah, that's so important because I get looked at a little bit something like, what is he doing? He's monkeying around, so that's why my channel Moving Monkey. But it's so a basic human thing. But being restricted in that motions is also sometimes a little bit frustrating for people. So how do you deal with that? So there is the technical standpoint of your ankle range of motion is not as good as it should be, and there is the psychological thing going on, like, but I sit in chairs because this is what we humans do. How do you educate your athletes or the people that come to you on that basis?
It's just, it goes, like you said, on education and teaching them. We weren't meant to just sit in chairs all the time. And, throughout your day, I want you to find a couple times and just sit down into a deep squat. I was the other day, we were flying, and at the airport, we had a little bit of a rest. And I just, plopped down just into a deep squat while I'm resting. you know, and my wife's like staring at me like, seriously again. And I'm like, you know, when we're sitting there, I don't want to just sit in a chair the whole time, you know, I feel stiff and I feel tight if I'm sitting in a chair for 2 hours before our flight, which then you're going to sit down again on the airplane. So, you know, it's just education on understanding your body was meant to move. And you know, if you stand all day, there can be bad, harmful things with that as well. Just as if you sit all day, you need to move and you need to express full motion, because if you don't, your body's going to learn and adapt to be stiff, because that's just how our body, they're very adapting in a good way or a bad way. So we need to make sure that we're adapting and maintaining the ability to move freely as your body was designed.
Yeah, you speak from my heart, because this is why I do all this stuff with Moving Monkey here in Germany, and try to get this education out. You're so successful in that. Your numbers speak for themselves. Yeah, 485,000, I guess, on Instagram.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. It's crazy to see.
Yeah, and now, as we talked before, your book, the Squat Bible, is translated in German right now. So if someone who is German speaking, who is listening to that and didn't get a hand on the English copy, should get the hand on the German copy. I just only recommend that, because as you said, the squat is normal. The squat should be used, and you have to use your body. And the squat is just an example of that. For example, hanging is another good thing for your shoulders. And I always give that tip for people after a heavy squatting session to cool down with some hanging, because your spine gets compressed, and so you won't have any neck or back pain. What is a number of tools, or maybe 2 exercises, that people should do before they start a heavy squatting session and after that?
So before, there's a stretch that's called the world's greatest stretch. It's basically like a very deep lunge. And the thing I love about it is that it works the hip. Yep. And a little bit of flexion. Exactly. Yep. So you're basically getting to a really deep lunge, and you're using your hips both ways. You're flexing one side, you're extending the other. But then you also have the upper body part of bending down and rotating. So you're moving your mid back. And that's a big thing, is a lot of people have very stiff thoracic spines. So it allows you to really move and use your hips in the full body. It's the reason it's called the world's greatest stretch, is because it really hits a lot of parts. Again, afterwards, I like doing something like that, or just like you said, hanging, moving your body. You know, whenever we have a barbell on our back, you're really pulling down, you're squeezing down, you're using your lat muscles. Well, that's a lot of internal rotation torque that you're pulling on the bar. And then also, if you're doing a lot of pulling or pressing, it's a lot of internal rotation. So if we can get some good foam rolling, even to like the lat muscles, or, you know, just moving, you said hanging from the bar, that's going to help sort of stretch out or immobilize those really stiff muscles like your teres major, and basically allow your body to just relax and move again as it should. So you have, both parts are important, the warm up and the cool down. And a lot of people, they think that the workout's the most important, which, you know, the workout is extremely important, because if you're not stressing your body, it's not going to adapt and make the changes that you want. But if you're not programming or priming it, I guess, to move well at the start, or allowing it to recover like you do afterwards, well, you know, you're not going to reach the potential of what's possible.
Nice. You mentioned a little bit of foam rolling can help sometimes. When is the accessory work, for example, foam rolling, necessary? Because I get a little bit of arguments about that with people in my workshops, because I'm not so much about foam rolling. I'm more in the mobility kind of thing, because I see a lot, for example, due to calisthenics work, that people are getting on the foam roll before and after the workout, and this is the only thing they do. So I will stretch out the fact or the argument that people should use their body first, and then maybe get a little bit of that foam rolling stuff in. when is the time when they should do that, so they don't overemphasize on that?
I would 100% agree. I think just like anything, some people can take an idea and run with it and do too much of it. You know, you can definitely do too much foam rolling, or a lot of people, they'll enter their workout and you'll see them for 30 minutes rolling or ball, it's way too much. Exactly. People don't understand that you can gain a lot of mobility with just dynamic movement. It's if you want to get into the science of it for the listeners, it's called the thixotropic effect. Basically, like ketchup. If ketchup's in a jar, it can get a little stiff. But if you shake the jar up and, eventually it can get really liquid and it can start moving.
I like that.
Same goes for your body and your muscles. If you're sitting around, you feel really stiff. But if you get up and you go for a jog and you do some like skipping or deep squatting, your body starts moving and it starts becoming more dynamic and more liquid is the word for thixotropic. So you loosen up basically, and you're not doing any stretching. You're not doing any foam rolling. You're just moving. So the first thing, that's why a dynamic warm up is so important for whatever you're trying to do that day, is just get moving, get your body moving. And then on top of that, if you have a restriction or a stiffness, especially if you've been training really hard, or if your body, again, has adapted to a specific stiffness, using foam rolling is just a tool. It's like going to a really mean massage therapist or going to a physiotherapist that's going to use like a scraping tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool that can help you improve mobility without decreases in performance, as if you were doing a really, really long held stretch, like a stretch for a minute. Sometimes if you're stretching your quads for a minute before squats, that could be a little too long of stretch, and it could actually decrease your ability of those quad muscles to produce a lot of force. The big thing I always say is you have to have a good warm-up first. For some people, stretching is important. They may need to do a little bit more stretching. Some people, they may need to do a little bit of foam rolling, but it's always individualized to the person. And I should never walk into the gym and see every single person lined up doing foam rolling for 20 minutes. The same way I shouldn't walk into a gym and see 20 people lined up all doing banded joint mobilizations for their ankle, because only some people need it. Yep. So the stuff that I always give, a lot of the tips and tools I show on Instagram or on YouTube, it always comes with the preface, test yourself after. And do you see improvements? Because if you don't see improvements in your mobility or your motion, it's probably not right for you. And in the same way, you want to be efficient and effective with your warm-up. When you get to the gym, you shouldn't be warming up for, 45 minutes before you even touch the barbell. You want to be able to get moving. You want to get loose. You want to be able to prime your body to move well. Some people need a little bit of foam rolling. Some people don't. Sometimes what I'll do is I will slide onto a foam roller sometimes and just go up, and this is after, a general warm up, like I said, and I'll just briefly go up and down my thigh one time. If I don't feel any stiffness, I jump off of it. I'm not using it. However, if I've done 5 sets of 10 back squat the day before and I jump on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's some stiff spots. I might use it for a minute, just to briefly work out some of those spots, jump up, and then go on. So again, it's all about why someone uses something. And like you said, always movement warm-up has to come first. And then if someone does need a little bit of, added help, it can be a useful tool. But again, it's just another tool in your tool belt. And I think a lot of people only have one tool, and then they sort of miss the potential of what's possible.
Yeah, so important that you mentioned that. It's like Charlie Munger said, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Yes.
That's so such a great picture to have the tool belt with you. So because another tool would be, as you said, testing. I focus so much on testing in my workshops and try to elaborate on that a little bit more, so that the people do a pre-test, do an exercise, do some foam rolling, do a stretch or whatever, and do a retest. Yes. If the pain is not gone away, or if you haven't been able to get some little bit more rotation in your shoulder, for example, then your nervous system won't adapt so much positively on that, and you should use another tool. So
Yes.
this is why all this stuff we put on Instagram is so important. And for those who are listening, check all those things out, but don't get paralyzed. The easiest thing is to do a pre-test, then do some of that good shit you see on Instagram.
Yes.
Yeah, nice. What is something that you found out maybe recently, what you put in your toolbox, which wasn't there before?
That's a good question. You know, every day I'm continuing to learn and grow, I think, as a physical therapist and understand the body a little bit more. I think one thing that I probably learned recently, I think probably the contribution of the teres major muscle in limiting overhead motion. So for the listeners out there, the teres major is a very small muscle that attaches to your shoulder and runs from the almost basically in your armpit. And it also works with the big lat muscles on your side. And for a lot of athletes that do a lot of pulling and a lot of pressing, that muscle, along with the lats, can sometimes become very stiff and doesn't want to move because it's been overused basically to be an internal rotator. Whenever we're doing like a clean pull or a snatch, our shoulders are on the pulling motion slightly internally rotated. But whenever you go overhead, when you pull that bar over your head, the shoulder then needs to externally rotate. So if that muscle is extremely stiff, it can limit the amount of external rotation and limit how well and how efficient you get into that overhead position. A lot of times I used to think it was just lats. And I've just recently, just with a lot of the reading I've been doing, I like listening to a lot of the stuff from Mike Reinold and Dave Tilley. Mike Reinold has MikeReinold.com, and then Dave Tilley runs Shift Movement Science. He does a lot of stuff with like gymnastics. Both are physiotherapists here in the U.S. But just understanding how that can play into it and understanding how we can improve mobility of that area is so important. And then also understanding that some people have appearing to have some stiffness over their head, not because they need to stretch, but because they actually need more control of their shoulders. So just understanding that, I think, has been sort of a new tool in my toolbox in assessing overhead and working with overhead athletes.
Nice. I like that, because sometimes we maybe focus too much on all those big stuff. Like you said, the ankle is not like the hip, the maybe most movable joint when it comes to squatting. Due to the fact that you mentioned ankle mobility over hip mobility, the fun thing is that maybe it was yesterday or the day before, I mentioned that in my Insta story as well, that sometimes the people, and I looking for your argument on that, most of the people are doing all those pushing forward their knees to get some more ankle movement and to stretch out their soleus and so on. But they don't focus on the hips so much. And for example, in my coachings that I do, I often find out that the best results I got for the people to squat better was to work on abduction and internal rotation, because due to all that sitting and sometimes with those duck feet walking, you overemphasize the external rotators of your hip, so the internal rotation is lacking. And working on that improved maybe 80% of the people I work with the squat. Why is that, for example, not so important in your terms, or working with your athletes, like the ankle mobility?
True. And that's a good argument. I think the big thing is you need to always take someone at an individual basis. Some people are definitely limited in the internal rotation at the hip as well, whereas some people are limited at the ankle. So I don't think you can say, only focus on one. I think definitely to take a very comprehensive view and to get the most out of any athlete, you have to look at both. I think I've just found that more people, at least that I've worked with, are more limited in ankle than hip. But again, I think it also depends on the patient population that you're working with. I think sometimes some of the younger athletes that I'm working with are very hypermobile at their hips. So they have a lot of motion at their hips, but not a lot of motion at their ankles because they haven't even thought about it. But again, I think that's the big thing if you're looking to improve your squat, you have to look at both. Because ankles are important and hips are important. And like you pointed out, internal rotation is so important at the hip, because I think a lot of people, they always hear external rotation at the hip because you want to be able to prime external rotation torque to get those glutes to turn on, to maintain stability, to keep the knees in line with the toes. But we forget that we need internal rotation mobility to keep your toes relatively forward, because we don't want people to squat, most of them at least, with their toes turned out like a duck. Now, some people, if they have like a different type of anatomy, it's not textbook anatomy, and their toes naturally turn out. They have what we call a femoral or acetabular retroversion. Basically, their anatomy dictates that they have to have sort of that duck walk whenever they move. Obviously, when they squat, they're going to have to turn their toes out. But for a large proportion of people, turning your feet relatively straight forward is sort of that ideal setup for the squat. And I think you need a good amount of internal rotation to be able to get there. And a lot of people are missing that. So if you see someone while you're screening the squat, if you're at home listening to this and your toes turn out really far, definitely you need to hit ankle mobility, because limited ankle mobility will also cause those toes to splay out to the side, but limited internal rotation of the hips will also do the same as well. So I think you need to be able to consider both to really find optimal patterning.
Yeah, nice. I sometimes feel that the fitness industry makes us looking at only some certain things. So the overemphasizement, as I said before, of certain movements or of certain patterns, because it's easier to make a video out of that, or to sell products for only that type of problem. This is also a good point that you mentioned concerning the anatomy, because not everyone should, and there is the reference to Calisthenics again. He said in his book, your feet should be hip width apart, then the torque and the knees, I think the knees outside, but the toes maybe a little bit straight. This is the most important thing I think people should get out of this interview, that a squat is really individual to a person and to a person's anatomy. Could you elaborate on that thing a bit? Why are people so paralyzed by how they should stand in the squats before they even squatting?
Yeah. So when we make those general statements, feet about shoulder width apart, toes relatively straight forward, drive your knees out to the side and squat down, that's just the very general way of teaching based on someone having ideal anatomy and mobility. The thing, though, is that not everyone's like that, Like I said before and alluded to the retroversion, there was, I think, a group of Japanese researchers, I believe, that a couple of years ago, they did research where they took a number of different cadavers and they looked at the anatomy of the hips, and they found that upwards of 40% of people didn't have ideal anatomy. Some people had hip sockets that opened more forward. Some people had hip sockets that opened more laterally. Some people had really deep hip sockets. Some people had really shallow hip sockets. All of those things are going to change how someone feels normal in a squat. So yes, there's sort of this ideal coaching point. And that's a lot. I mean, in my book, I talk about the ideal squatting technique. But the big thing I also talk about is we need to be able to find what's normal for you. And that's why also screening your body is so important, because you may find, wow, my body isn't this normal. And that's okay. You know, it's about finding what's right for your body, and then also understanding, don't base 100% of your squat technique, what you feel comfortable in, that it's only anatomy. Yes, you may have femoral anteversion or retroversion, but you may also have very stiff ankles or really stiff internal rotators. So, you know, yes, you may need to turn your toes out, but it may not be as far as you need to. So it can get a little difficult to sort of, you know, show the two, but that's sort of where we come out to try to explain the difference. So like there's a test called Craig's test, and it's where you're on your stomach and you have a friend, they have your hand on the side of your hip and they're rotating your lower leg in and out. And they try to find sort of where your hip ends up, and that can dictate and show you, your anatomy is a little bit normal. You are different than normal, and that can change your squat stance. And then if you combine tests like that for your anatomy with the mobility test that we show, can really give you a better appreciation for understanding whether or not your anatomy is, or the reason for your squat is solely based on anatomy or mobility or a combination of the two. So the big thing is working with a coach that understands how to screen your body, working with a physio that understands how to screen your body, can really help you understand and get into the best stance possible for your body.
That's always a thing of just screening, just testing, and really putting this puzzle together. And sometimes I get a little bit frustrated when people come to me and they say, I went to this doc and this doc, and sometimes to this physio and this physio. And I ask them, were you tested or were you screened in any way? And they say, no, I was lying down and they managed around and massaged and whatever. Which tests do you use most often to screen someone?
Good question. Yeah. And like you said, unfortunately, there's still so many doctors or physios out there that they don't understand the movement first component of everything. It's got to be movement first. So a couple of different tests. First off, we look at the squat pattern. I say, put your feet relatively straight forward, shoulder width apart, and then squat. Does it look good? Does it not look good? If it looks good, all right, let's move on. If it doesn't look good, then we need to figure out why it doesn't look good. Like we said, we can test mobility first. So we can do that 5-inch wall test. We can do different things like the Thomas test, which is basically you're laying on your back on the edge of a bed, hold one leg, let the other leg calm down. That's a way of testing for mobility. Mobility of the lower body, especially like your IT band, stiffness, the rectus, the hip flexors. Then we can also do different anatomy tests. So we can do, Craig's test is one. There's a couple others. I'm not 100% sure the name, but we can move your legs around and we can find out if you lay on your back and bring your thigh directly up towards your shoulder, can you get your knee to touch your shoulder? Or does it feel like it pinches or blocks deep in your hip? Can you then take your knee and maybe go to the outside of your shoulder and you get a lot more motion? Because if you're able to bring your knee a lot further up towards your head by moving your knee towards the outside of your shoulder instead of just straight forward, that may show you that, again, you have a different type of hip anatomy that requires you to take then a different stance in your squat.
Yeah, this nice examples for, there are many tests you can do if you have problems with squatting. Which capital of your book, which chapter of your book do you recommend for people to read if they don't have any time and they should at least read this chapter? Which would you recommend?
So it's a tough one to pick just one. The second chapter is the one where we just talk about movement. we talk about how to perform a basic bodyweight squat. I think that would be the first one that I would say. You need to learn the specific cues about how to create stability with your feet, how to start with your hips, how to keep your knees in line with your body, how to perform a basic bodyweight squat. That I think would be the number one chapter to read, because that's the one thing so many people have problems with. And a lot of times, just some coaching cues can be the biggest change in teaching you how to perform a basic bodyweight squat. So I'd say that's the big one. Then what we do is I teach sort of all the basic barbell squats, high bar, low bar, back squat, front squat, overhead squat. So it goes into those. And then from there, all the other chapters, or a lot of them, are teaching you sort of break down the body joint by joint to sort of talk about, all right, your ankle needs mobility. Here's how you screen it. Did you find a problem? Here's how you improve it. So it's not a very long book at all, but it's a book that's packed with sort of the go-to things that everyone can use and take away and understand. It's not written, doctor speaking down to you. It's doctor sitting and talking to you and with you to sort of understand all those parts of the body.
Nice. I like those how-to books too. Yeah, maybe. So how do you say, oh, that's nice? Now I have a little bit of lacking English. Scrolling through the pages. Do you say that in English?
Yeah. Scrolling through the pages. Yeah.
Right. Scrolling through the pages and maybe to get something out of for the next session, or to look up when you have some problems and so on. I like that, and I like that from your book especially. What have you learned through all this, getting into the research with the squat and so on, for your own training?
Yeah, it's definitely helped really fix a lot of things in my training, is that I now take, I think, a lot more time to understand if something isn't feeling right, how to go about specifically addressing it, screening it, and fixing it. I think for such a long time, I mean, I would have aches and pains, like I would have patellar tendonitis, or I would have, a shoulder that's hurting a little bit. And I was sort of left with, what do I do? How do I go about fixing it? How do I screen to find out what's wrong? And this book was, while writing it for other people, was also a learning experience for myself. And, oh, that makes sense. That's an easy way to approach this. That's a great way to fix this. I remember when I was in school, and obviously this specifically talking about the injury of patellar tendonitis isn't in this book, but one coming up in the future. I had an issue. I had some patellar tendonitis. I was training 2-a-days. So twice a day I was training, leading up to the 2011 US Nationals. And with all the motion I was doing and movement, I developed some knee pain. And I remember going to one of my physical therapy teachers being like, what do I do? I don't know how to fix this on my own yet. I was still very young in school. And he was like, well, how often are you squatting? And I'm like, well, a lot. I'm training every day. And he's like, well, just stop. I'm like, just stop? He's like, yeah, you're doing too much. And I was like, that shouldn't be the answer. There should be more to it than just stop doing what you're doing. And that's someone who's supposed to be teaching me. Yes, so now doing my own research, I'm finding, well, I could do some, isometrics. I could do a wall sit. I could maybe just take some things. I could take the squats. I could maybe take out 2 squat days and put in like an RDL, or a pulling day, to where I'm not overloading the knee joint as much, but still training. There's different things that you can manipulate and train, and maybe instead of doing a full depth squat, I could do a box squat, different things like that, to where you're still training, but you're able to manipulate things to help the healing process start, but not just stop doing what you're doing, and I guess that's definitely something that has really much so, improved the way that I train and the efficiency that I train. Because, I'm 32, or 31. I'm about to be 32 years old this year. And my body doesn't, respond as easily as it did when I was 18 and starting weightlifting. There's days where I don't feel very good. There's days where, you know, this is hurting a little bit or that's hurting a little bit, but using all this knowledge has helped me keep my body in working shape to where I haven't had big injuries. I haven't had to take months off of training. I just change things up and can manipulate things so that I can continue doing the stuff that I love to do. And that's really what I've been trying to help everyone else understand so they can continue doing the things that they do. And because the thing I hate the most is when someone comes to me for a physiotherapy appointment and they're like, you know, my elbow's hurting. And I'm like, well, what did the doctor that sent you here say? And he said, stop going to the gym. And I'm like, no, let's approach this differently.
Yeah, it's too easy of an answer. And I guess it made you stronger. Yeah, that you changed up your program, a little bit more of movement variation. And I made that experience as well. I got a little bit of knee pain after a training session, and it won't go away. It was funny because it started when I started with weightlifting. So I was really pumped up to do all this weightlifting stuff, and then my knees started to hurt. Yeah, but I haven't focused on the drills I should have done. For example, single leg training. That made me so much stronger. For example, now I'm doing Bulgarian split squats with 100 kilos. So 50 kilos here, 50 kilos here, or a single leg deadlift with 100 kilos. And this transferred so much into all this squatting with bilateral, squatting overhead bilaterally, and so on, that this pain or this, it was a meniscus tear. I didn't get an operation because I said as well, don't stop, maybe get movement that is pain-free, and focusing on the pain-free movement first, and then continuing to do all the stuff you did before when you're getting this pain-free range a little bit wider and wider throughout your training sessions. Concerning the single leg variations of a squat, it gets some more attention due to CrossFit, as we talked before. I found so much value in that topic. How do you integrate single leg exercises in your training or in the training with your athletes?
I think single leg training, like you said, is so important. Whether it's a single leg squat or a Bulgarian split squat or a single leg deadlift, I think it's extremely important because when you go single leg, you have to have that much more stability, or else it's going to look like crap. You're going to fall over. And I think a lot of times, especially in weightlifting, we only do double leg stuff. You know, you're only cleaning, you're only snatching, you're only squatting, you're only doing pulls. And you can miss sometimes the potential of what's there because you can develop these problems and then they're not visible. You can't see them until something starts hurting. So doing some single leg training, I think, is extremely important. I try to do some single leg squats a few times a week, usually after my main lifts. I try to add in some single leg stuff a lot of times on the weekend when I have a little bit more time to train. Especially coming from the rehab perspective, single leg training is definitely a huge component of the rehab process for someone that has an injury. Usually we'll do single leg stuff first before we get back to the double leg stuff if someone's having bad knee pain, because there's such an issue there. So yeah, definitely I think the single leg component is huge. For someone who's healthy, I usually do single leg stuff as an accessory afterwards. And for someone who's injured, I do single leg stuff first to either help return the body to normal, I guess, or help prime the body before you do double leg stuff. That's just a general way of saying it. I think some people could benefit from doing maybe a set or two of some single leg stuff before they then get into their workout too. But that's sort of a general way that some people can go about doing it. But I think if you are not doing any single leg stuff in your training, you are missing out on what your body should be trained like, and you have the potential to invite injury into the picture.
Yeah, I agree so much on that point. And due to the fact you mentioned the rehab process, and I like you organize that stuff. What is, for example, your point on rehab with all those Erics and wobbly mats and squatting on that?
Oh gosh, yeah, good question.
I really
Yes, to a point, I think it can be taken way too far. You see some people that are doing snatches on a wobble board. Unless you're in the circus, I don't think you're ever going to do a snatch on a wobble board. So you have to weigh the risk and reward with every single thing that you're doing. And I've found that it's probably not a good idea to call people out on social media anymore. But I always say you got to be smart. Be smart about it. I think to a point, like using an unstable surface, like an Eric's pad, can be helpful for like the rehab of like an ankle. You know, when you're you have a soccer or football player that has an ankle sprain. Part of the training and rehab from a return of an ankle sprain can be doing some single leg balance on like an Eric's pad, an unstable surface, because when you're running and playing on the field, the surface isn't always completely flat and you're moving and jumping, you know, so throwing in some training where you're on an unstable surface requires your body to create that much more stability and sense of joint position. So it can be helpful. But again, it's only a tool in the toolbox. And then again, you have to think about how far are you taking that exercise. Are you just having them do like a small single leg squat on an Eric's pad or a balance mat and just sort of balancing for 30 seconds, maybe doing like a small ball toss back and forth? Or are you having them try to squat a barbell on it? Like, to a point, there's too much of a risk that's not going to necessarily give you that much more of a reward, you know, for doing something that complicated. So just with everything, like the foam rolling, you can do just enough. It is good for some people. And then you can take it way too far, which I think you and I have both probably seen a number of people that take stuff way too far, and we just sit there and we shake our heads.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because sometimes you can turn it into a positive, because I don't know if you know that Instagram account it called Guilty Killer.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen that one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You should check that out to get a good laugh, because he does snatches not on a wobbly board, but on a wobbly board that is on a ball, and then it's a circus number, as you said before.
Yeah.
And it's crazy what he does. He was a former, or he is a football player from a Russian team.
Okay.
And so fucking strong. He does Turkish get-ups with a barbell and 90 kilos.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's fucking crazy, yeah. It's like Jujimufu. He does.
Yeah. That guy's crazy too.
I practice the splits. I can do the splits and stand up from that.
Can you?
What I call mobility. I maybe say people this is mobility, but you shouldn't be able to do that unless it's your goal. And it's also like you said, it's a tool and you should use it, but wisely.
Yes.
And I really like how you thought through all that, and with your big experience and your awesome background, and the coachings you do, you get so much out of that, and I think you got a good standing as well here in Germany.
Thank you.
And you said your copy is in German available, and doing with the good Max. I'm wearing his t-shirt.
Max. Yes, Max is awesome. I'll be as soon as I get a couple of my authored copies sent from the publisher, I'm going to hook up with Max, and we're going to do a giveaway for some free books for people out there. So follow Max if you guys don't already on Instagram. He's got some awesome stuff and a great guy. Yeah.
I think the Monkey Gang does, because I support him with the mobility and so on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and I hope the Monkey Gang got so much valuable information out of that interview as I did. And yeah, on that note, thank you very much, Aaron, that you were part of the Moving Monkey podcast, and maybe looking forward to a personal interview. I like that as well when I come to the States, or if you're here in Cologne and whatever, or if you're meeting Max, whatever we can arrange, if you're open to that. And yeah, thanks a lot. And if you have any any comments or anything you want to express at the end of this interview for the Monkey Gang, then feel free. And I'm out, and I think thank you, and I'm, as always, say, keep moving, stay sexy. Aaron.
Thank you so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. And yes, we'll definitely have to do an in-person interview. I'd love to be able to get over to Germany sometime. That's where, like we talked about before, great-great-great-grandparents came over from Germany many years ago. But yes, I'd love to be able to come and see Germany one day, and we'll definitely have to hook up and do an in-person interview then.
Nice. And an in-person squatting session.
Yes, for sure.
Hey, last question.
Yes.
What is your favorite type of squat?
Favorite type of squat? Back squat.
Back squat. Nice. Okay.
Yes.
For me, it's the front squat version.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Aaron.
Hey, see you, man. Thank you so much.